So this session is called Making a Difference at the Hawaii State Legislature, and it features three illustrious panelists. We've got Gary Hooser from the Hawaii Alliance for Progressive Action. Tina Wildberger is our representative at the state legislature from South Maui.
Aloha, everybody.
Aloha. And Simon Russell is an actual farmer, and he has done a lot of lobbying at the state legislature, and he has quite a bit of experience that he's going to share with us today. So we're going to talk about several things, and these topics may kind of meld together, but I actually have them. I just want to call them out. So the first thing is how a bill becomes a law.
Should we go around and do introductions, or you want me to just jump in and talk about how a bill really becomes law?
You can briefly talk about your experience. I believe you were the Senate president at one point, majority leader.
Yeah, I spent 8 years representing Kauai and Ni'ihau as their state senator, and 4 of those years was as majority leader. I also spent 8 years on the Kauai County Council, and I had the privilege of working with Governor Neil Abercrombie, who appointed me to be the director of the Office of Environmental Quality Control. And so I was anxious to jump in on the EIS discussion, but I held back. And so right now, basically, I'm an advocate and try to support and teach other people good advocacy, as well as supporting good people to run for public office. And Maui, I have to say, and it's not just because Representative Wildberger and Councilmember Kelly King are on the line, but you folks have got a really strong base, I believe, to build on for the future. And they're doing good work at the legislature, and other counties, including Kauai County, are watching your county council and some of the good work they're doing as well. So hats off to all of you on Maui. Just real quick, a couple of notes, if I could throw some stuff out there. The HRS 343 has been suspended with the governor's emergency declaration. So I'm not sure how extensive that goes, but it is included as one of the several laws, which included HRS 92, the Sunshine Law, the records laws, HRS 205, 205A, 171, which are land use laws. Hopefully, these are used prudently, these emergency powers, but just everyone should be aware that happened. And that came from Hawaii 1,000 Friends, which is an organization I would encourage everyone to get on their email list as well. Hawaii 1,000 Friends, they don't overload you with email, but they give you good information. You know, how a bill becomes law, really becomes law, I think starts with the elections, and we have elections coming up. And in spite of this disaster, people are running for office. There'll be contested elections, so I encourage everyone to really find a candidate and support them actively. Because the most influential person to a lawmaker are the people around them, the people, their family and friends, people that help them. And so you get to know your lawmakers, I think, if you really want to affect change. But back to how a bill really becomes law, it has to be a specific idea. It can't just be, let's increase agriculture, let's have food self-sufficiency. It has to be specific how we're going to do that, number one. And it has to be ripe. There's thousands of bills that get introduced, and this has to be ripe if you really want it to become law, because of the competition among for bandwidth. And ripe to me means it may have been introduced a couple times already. It may have been passed in other states and communities, but brand new ideas that have not been thought through have a really hard time. And ripeness also means the community is aware of it, and it's a broad-based community. So there's a lot of education. It can't be a real narrow, just, you know, I'll use the pesticide issue or the GMO issue. That took years to grow into community awareness. So the broader community, I would tell people it's not just my hippie environmental North Shore friends who support it. but it's rank and file people out in the community who are concerned. So it has to be ripe, and it has to be supported by a broad cross-section. It's really hard to get narrow things down. I'm working with the Kona coffee farmers on an issue, and it's pretty narrow for coffee farmers. And so it doesn't really, most people don't, what doesn't really affect me. And so it's challenging if you don't have a broad cross-section. You need a legislator to champion the issue normally. I'll use the water steal issue. And again, Representative Wildberger stood up. That wasn't passing something, it was trying to stop something from being passed. But you need a few champions that are willing to put their neck out, that are willing to raise their hands and say, wait a second, this is not a good thing. And conversely, you need a champion to say, no, we need to do this. So you need a champion. And remember, they're all working on hundreds and if not thousands of issues. So you can't, you have to fight for that bandwidth. You got to have data. And I'll just be real quick here. I'm not going to talk a lot. I want to leave a lot of time for questions. You have to have data. You have to have data to support whatever you're trying to do. If it's food self-sufficiency, how much food is grown here, you know, if it's pesticides, how bad is this stuff? But there's always somebody else on the other side. They're going to have data too. And so you have to keep up with the data, but the data at the end of the day does not win. The data has to be there. What wins, in my opinion, is people in the room. And whether that's virtually, via email or telephone calls, ideally physically in the room. And for big issues, big important stuff, and that's what we all want to do, I think, you have to have a lot of people in the room. You have to dominate the legislature.
Gary, Gary, let me interrupt you for just a second.
Sure.
I found the graphic for how a bill becomes a law.
Okay.
And so I'd like to know if you want me to put that up while you're talking.
Yeah, why don't we put that up afterwards, because I'm talking about how a bill really becomes a law.
Okay. And
And
let me ask you.
there is a process, of course. It gets introduced in the House, introduced in the Senate, and that's important stuff that we need to educate people with. But yeah, go ahead. You have a question?
I just wanted to ask you, so as a legislator, if you know, for example, that there are many, many people who are interested in an issue, but they just couldn't make it to be in the room, as you say, do you feel pressured by the people who are in the room, can afford to be in the room? You know,
Well,
it's challenging for a lot of citizens to be in the room, and
right.
it doesn't seem like written testimony has the same weight. Could you answer
Yeah,
that?
I mean, it absolutely, being in the room is important, and who's in the room is important. If I'm a legislator, okay, I have what I call a hierarchy of influence. Who's the most important person to me? Who has to be in the room who can influence whatever I do? Number one, it's my wife and my daughter and my son and my family. And then it's people close to me. And then the hierarchy comes out, but essentially it's people in your district. And so we have to be strategic about that. Maui's played a strategic role with Senator Baker, and I worked with Senator Baker for a long time and have great respect for her, but she has been on the other side of too many issues that I've been involved with recently. And so the people on Maui, for example, in her district, sitting in the room, have the most influence of anyone. And I would say virtual is better than nothing. You know, there's this, again, the hierarchy of testimony. That the most important testimony is somebody of influence who's in your district, who's sitting across the table from you. Next would be testimony remotely, emails, that kind of thing. Then you go further down the list would be petitions and people from not from your district, that kind of thing. It is, you know, when you go to hearings and sometimes there's no testimony taken, but the room is still full of people, the public, and they're there because they want the decision makers to see them in the room. I go to a lot of hearings like that just because I want people to know who are making the decisions, whether it's Representative Wildberger or somebody else. If I'm in the room, then they know this issue is important to me. And if that matters to them, then they may look at that issue a little closer. Being in the room is important. The two more quick points, and then I'll pass the baton if you would. Uh, what is the most important thing to any legislator, any elected official? And I'll answer that. And I believe it's to get reelected. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to go to jail for that. I'm not going to do other stuff. But if you love what you do, you want to keep doing it. And so you better please your community. Whether you like it or not, you better please your community. The other thing, legislators don't like controversy. They don't want controversy that might hurt them. And so if an issue has a sense of a growing controversy, then they want to deal with that. And that's why filling the room, and that's why the op-ed pieces and letters and emails are so important, because they just have to deal with it. It's sucking up too much time. So we have elections coming up. I encourage people to get involved. My last example of someone who's real important to me is a guy named Larry Rivera. Larry Rivera is an old guy on Kauai who would go out in the hot sun and knock on doors for me. And he never asked me for anything. He'd just knock on doors, he'd hold signs, he'd work for me because he liked me, he loved what I was doing. And if Larry Rivera asked me for help, I'm gonna help him. I'm not gonna go to jail for him. I'm not gonna violate my principles for him. So it's that relationships. And we live in a place where we can each have relationships. It's small enough. And so I encourage people to have relationships with your legislators and help the ones you like and challenge the ones you don't like. Okay. Open for questions, or we can pass the baton.
Okay, we're going to go, Tina, you're going to be up next, but I'm quickly going to put up the how a bill becomes a law because I finally found it. So just very quickly, for people who don't know much about the legislature, and even for those who do, there are over 3,000 bills that are introduced each year. So at the top left, we have a bill that's introduced, and then it goes to first reading, and it gets referred to committees. The committee chairs decide whether to have a hearing, and then if they have a hearing, then they issue a committee report, and then it goes to second reading. I should say that a bill can be referred to multiple committees. It'll go to second reading and go to the next committee hearing, and then there can be up to 3 and maybe even 4 referrals. I've only heard of 3, but then it goes to third reading, and each of these readings is before the full legislature. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
That's right.
And then, so after it passes third reading, let's say this bill was introduced in the House. At that point, if it passes third reading with a majority vote in that branch of the legislature, then it gets sent to the non-originating. So if it was the House that originated it, it'd be sent to the Senate. And then the bill would have to go for first reading, referred to committees, second, third. At any one of these stages, the bill can be revised and the language can be changed. And it's a very interesting process. Some people compare it to making sausage. So if the bill passes in the same form as the originating chamber, so if the House introduced it and passed it in third reading, and then the Senate passed it in the same form, then the bill would go all the way around to this bottom rectangle, and so then it goes straight to the governor, and if he signs it, then it becomes law. If there are any changes, then the non-originating chamber amends the bill, and then the originating chamber can agree with the changes or disagree. If they agree, then it passes final reading in the House in this example. If they disagree, then they have to have a conference committee. The conference committee comes up with, if they can agree, then the bill passes. If the bill passes final reading in both houses, then it gets sent to the governor. If the conference committee cannot agree between them, then the bill dies. And the bill can die at any point along the way. So that's my lay perspective And I'm going to hand it over to Tina to comment and correct me if necessary.
That was darn good, Albert.
Thank you.
What actually, and then what Gary was speaking to, and what actually happens
Right.
is they disagree to everything from each opposite chamber, so that they can take everything that's made it that far to conference committee and use those bills as bargaining chips between the House and the Senate. And that's why so many things die, because each is holding all of these bargaining chips. And, you know, we have a very high concentration of power in the hands of the committee chairs and leadership. Those are the decision makers. So when you talk about lobbying legislators for a particular issue, I have a lot of people that come to me about a lot of issues that I just have absolutely no power in. They'll come to me because I'm on finance, and finance sees almost everything, but I'm not on the education committee. I'm not on the human services committee. I find myself interested in advocating for and caring about issues that never would have occurred to me. The midwife bills comes to mind. But that conference committee is where all the business happens. I had my first session last year. I had a bill that went all the way through the House, all the way through the Senate with unanimous votes on every single component. And then when it got to conference committee, the speaker simply didn't assign conferees. The Senate did, but the House leadership just didn't assign conferees. I sent a memo asking for conferees to be assigned, but just didn't happen. So that bill died. It was a helmet mandate for rental scooter riders. So it was very narrow. There wasn't a lot of opposition testimony, even from the bikers, that they wanted to oppose it for purpose, just for, you know, they don't want helmets. And it was written so that they wouldn't be mandated to wear helmets, but it ended up dying in conference, even though there was no opposition voting at all. So, but as far as lobbying your legislators, it doesn't do you really any good to go to all 51 people. Pick the people that are on the committee. Pick the chair and the vice chair are your two most influential decision makers. Then the other members of the committees that the bill has been referred to. Going door to door to all 51 people without an appointment is not a good use of your time, especially if you have come over and spent money on airfare. Try to get an appointment. Many legislators have basic hours when anybody, even if it's not their committee attentions, can call and make an appointment. Keep your appointments short. You don't really want to ask for more than 10 or 15 minutes of a legislator's time. I personally allocate a half hour between my appointments, but you get past a half hour and their minds are wandering from my perspective. You want to stick to your subject. You want to be concise. When you're submitting written testimony, I think it's really important to go ahead and get on capital.hawaii.gov and make an account. Register with the state website and make an account. It remembers your information. I don't think they spy on you. And you can get on and sign on quickly and easily each time you want to advocate for one measure or another. When you submit testimony, testimony is sort of hierarchical as well. Any state agencies that do work within the subject matter of the bill that would be affected by your legislation will submit testimony either in opposition or in support, or sometimes not supporting or opposing for political reasons and providing comments, sometimes just offering supporting the spirit of the bill, but here are some corrections or edits I would suggest. So you've got your government agencies, and then groups like Albert's Maui Tomorrow and the Sierra Club, or Hui Nava Eha, any organization that has been doing advocacy, that has a reputation for community support and knowledgeable people on their boards, any community association. Those testimonies are taken and gathered secondarily, and followed by that individual testimony. So There are a lot of advocates that have made an advocacy organization. And so instead of just submitting as an individual, they're submitting, and there's probably dozens of them on Oahu. We have fewer of them over here, but many advocates that work at the Capitol. For instance, Josh Frost has Pono Hawaii Initiative. Gary has HAPA. And Lucianne has the Sierra Club. And so if you are with or have an organization, be sure to use your letterhead and put that on, because that testimony is going to be seen up at the top of the stack. After that, you have individual testimony. When the Sierra Club sends out a call to action and sends a pre-composed testimony that hundreds and hundreds of people, all they have to do is hit click, and then their name gets put on that same verbatim, plagiarized, if you will, testimony. That holds a little less weight than original composition. If you've taken the time to actually express your thoughts in writing, legislators do take that into account. Now, we don't want to encourage people from participating, and so many more people participate with that one click. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do that one click. I'm just helping you understand the hierarchy of legislation and how it's important and what level of importance each one holds. There's another like one-click name, support, and oppose that is part of the legislative system, and all of those are compiled at the very bottom. And when the committee chair runs her hearing, they will go through the testimony agency by agency, advocacy group by advocacy group, and then by individual. At the end, they'll say, and we have 38 individuals in support and 22 individuals in opposition. And then they'll call the room and say, is there anyone here left to testify? And there may be people in the room there to testify. And when you talk about in-person or not in-person, I had my first very scary committee hearing for the Aquarium collecting bill, which is something that's a big problem with fishermen who, they call themselves subsistence fishermen, but they're clucking fish off the reef and selling them for human amusement via air freight to mainland aquarium collectors. And they pay $100 a year for a permit to pluck a public trust resource off of our reefs, unmitigated and unsupervised by the Department of Land and Natural Resources. They self-report, and we all know what happens when organizations are self-reporting. So testimony is important, and it doesn't always get you the result that you want, but at least if the chair of that committee has 600 pages of testimony in support, and then they don't pass the bill, that's on record. They're on record for ignoring the voices of our community. So it really is important to engage. You can sign up for alerts for bills that you're interested in. As Lucianne explained, for instance, their lobbyist for the Sierra Club on Maui, on Oahu, Jody Molinowski, is the brightest young woman, a great advocate, and she is able to send out calls to action for things that are important. Is that a good stopping point?
That's great, Tina. I learned a lot just sitting there. Thank you very much. We've got a few questions, and I'll just ask them right now, and then we'll go to Simon. So Mark Sheehan asks, would Hawaii benefit by having one legislative chamber and a year-round legislative session? Anybody care to take that on?
I would agree with that. I think we got a lot more work that needs to be done, and that part-time legislator, and we're not part-time anyway, just because we're not in the chamber. The process is too fast. Something I didn't get to mention about testimony, the reality of testimony. My committee chair, this is for real. We prepare, as the vice chair's office, prepare all the testimony for the chair for the committee hearing the next day. We start compiling it the day before. All the testimony gets sent to the chair only at 3 p.m. the day before, and then late testimony at 5. p.m. And then the next morning, we look for more late testimony in the morning before the committee hearing, and we send that to the chair. Just last week, my chair of the Environmental Protection and Energy Committee instructed my office not to release testimony until 15 minutes before the hearing. So each bill could have hundreds and hundreds of pages of testimony, and the rest of the committee members, besides the chair and the vice chair, don't get to see the testimony until what used to be an hour before the committee hearing is now 15 minutes before this particular committee. There are no rules. They can do whatever they want. And I find that personally to be a purposeful subversion of our democratic process. And how can committee members that are going to be voting on this supposed to be able to make an informed decision about these bills and their consequences, their unintended consequences or their purposeful consequences, if they don't get to see the testimony that's being provided by the agencies, the advocates, and the individuals? Thanks.
Wow.
If I could jump in real quick on that same question.
Thank you, Gary.
I agree with the year round, I think, because there's just so much work to do and things get rushed under the threat of a deadline. The one chamber, there's another side to that because there's checks and balances. With the two chambers, the Senate and the House compete. And so if you only had one, you would not have that competition. You could argue it'd be more efficient, but you wouldn't have checks and balances with the two chambers. I think the most important thing, getting back to what Representative Wildberger points out, of the for the want of a better way to say it, the corrupt nature of the process. The answer is electing good people. The reason the process works the way she just said it does was because a majority support that. And so we need to elect a majority of people who put people on the planet first, who put community and open government and that kind of thing first. And I would be remiss if I didn't compliment Simon Russell. I know he's thrown his hat in the ring, and I know this is not an election forum, but I applaud anyone who puts their hat in the ring, who supports the values that I believe we all do. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let, we have a couple more questions. I'm going to let Simon go ahead, and then we can answer the final two questions. So Simon, are you ready? So I'm just ready. Effective lobbying and testimony.
I'm going to try and share my screen here. Let me know if it works. So mahalo, the opportunity to share. I was the legislative chairman for the Hawaii Farmers Union United for 6 years, from 2013 to 2018, I think, and spent quite a good amount of time in the ledge advocating for sustainable and regenerative family farmers. My name is Simon Russell, and it incorporated an advocacy group called Hui o Malama Aina a few years ago. And Hui o Malama Aina has been my passion for almost 30 years when I started Environmental Club at Kauai Community College in 1991. And there's a little bit of contact information for anybody who wants to reach out to it, but it is an organization that's a strong advocate for the Aina, and it's also a registered lobbyist with the County of Maui and the state of Hawaii. And anybody who spends, I believe, more than 5 hours a year influencing public policy needs to register as a lobbyist. So how can you support or oppose state legislation with your emails? This session, as Representative Wildberger astutely pointed out, you need to go to the state website, capital.hawaii.gov, and create a username and a password. And then once you have your personal account, which is very useful because they can send you updates on when measures are going to be heard and what their status is, and they'll email information to your email account. Once you have that account, you'll be able to testify by email. So if you have a certain bill in mind, you enter it into the bill status box as shown on the screen here. The Hawaii State Legislature's website gives you the opportunity to put in a bill number, and then you just click go, and that'll bring up the actual bill itself, which is super easy. The bill for you on the screen is one that I helped craft in 2014 for a farmer training program to help farmers understand and learn and implement whole systems of agriculture. It was called the On-Farm Mentoring Bill. And it's actually still in cycle. This bill, I can't remember the name this session, but the session is suspended for now, so it's impossible to testify on it, unfortunately. But it's in its 6th year this year, maybe even its 7th year, this measure, which is on-farm mentoring and support for teaching whole systems farming. So once you have achieved the not difficult task of finding the actual bill that you'd like to support or oppose, you need to click on the PDF file next to the bill number, and you can read it. And once you've read it, then you can go back to the previous slide. You'll see the blue icon here. It's a blue button. It says Submit Testimony. You just click on that. And then the legislature itself has a wonderful little guide at capital.hawaii.gov, and I have the link farther down in this talk, and you can very easily support testimony by clicking in this little area here. You can oppose testimony here or just submit comments. Legislators want to know whether or not you're going to testify in person. The committees are going to want to know if you're going to be representing yourself or the organization, and you have the opportunity to either upload a file that you've created on your own computer, and if you don't, and frequently I don't, I just submit testimony here in this little box, text box, and you can do it from your phone or your smart device or your home computer. And I have to say that the legislature makes this so easy, and it is really important that everybody submit testimony. It is my experience that email testimony isn't as useful as in-person testimony, but it does really count. And I watch committee chairs very often. They will count the amount of testimonies that come in. They'll say, 900 against and 100 for, the bill dies. So really important things to remember when you're submitting written testimony is that unless you represent an organization, you really must testify as yourself. Just because you're a Sierra Club member, a member of the Farmers Union, doesn't mean you speak for those organizations. So please remember to testify as yourself if you're not authorized representative. And in your written testimony, it's really important to state your position. You're strongly supportive of this, or you strongly oppose that. It's very important that it's right there at the top of the testimony, like the subject line, and then also right after your introduction in the body. I also recommend being firm as well as civil and respectful in the language you use in testimony. Your testimony will be there forever, by the way. Once you submit testimony, it's on the Capitol website under testimony, where that bill is featured on the Capitol website. So be clear and straightforward. As was talked about earlier, there's over 3,000 bills that go into the ledge every session, and each one has many testimonials associated with it. So it's just a lot of information coming in to the legislators' inboxes. So if you want to have your testimony be impactful, you need to be clear, succinct. Your testimony should be easy to read. Very important. So if you want more details, just go to the capital.hawaii.gov, and there's some instructions there. This link that is provided, and I'm all for the opportunity to share, and I'm happy to distribute this. Anybody who would like to have it.
Good job, Simon.
Oh, thanks. And you too, Representative Wahlberger. I really appreciate your
Yeah.
hard work. You're one of my heroes. Erwin.
Can't do it without you guys.
Oh, I guess I was on mute. Sorry. I want to point out, thank you, everyone. And we'll go to questions in just a second. I want to point out that we did send out an email to all of the people who registered by yesterday. So there's a link on our website that has several resources, like how to sign up for an account to testify at the legislature. And so I think we also posted that in the comments, the chat comments. Maybe we could post that again. So that's a link to our website where you can go and get the resources that Simon and our other presenters were mentioning.
I forgot one little thing. Can I add one little thing to my, my office manager, Natalia, is a brilliant young woman, and she gave me little points, and I neglected to mention when you're submitting written testimony, we've talked about how it can be hundreds and hundreds of pages and how we don't see it until right before the meeting, especially if you're not a chair or vice chair. Use bold type when you're presenting oppose or support so we can find that fast. And then any important details like bullet points, anything that makes it super easy to read, quick glance, you're probably not going to get more than a few seconds of your legislator's eyes on your testimony. So if you've got a color logo that looks nice, if you have several important points, prioritize them so the real killer points right on top, and use bold print for support or oppose, or any keywords that you want their eyes to see in the quick few seconds they're going to be able to give to your very important voice. Thanks.
Thank you, Tina. That's really important. I'd also like to share something that some people do. They'll submit their testimony, like if you're there, you can submit it on green paper or something like check out. So anything you can do to differentiate it. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, just real quick, like I think when I served in this legislature, I would get testimony and people would not put their name on the email. And they would be alohasurfbob@gmail.com. And so put your name and where you live. And we talked earlier about the most important people, the committee chairs, the vice chair, the people on the committee. I would say the most important person would be your legislator who represents you in your district. And I talk to groups and I'm just amazed at how people don't know who the representative is. They might know who the governor is, but know who your senator and representative is. And even if they're not on the committee, let them know how you feel about this issue. And if enough people in their district do that, they will then go talk to the chair, or they run into the chair or the vice chair in the elevator or at lunch or something and say, gee, I'm getting all these calls from my district. But put in your testimony, you know, if it's Kihei, I'll pick on Representative Wildberger for a second, put that in bold. I live in your district, and you know, please help me out here. So know who they are and develop a relationship with them. That's the most important takeaway, I think.
Right. Thank you, Gary. And I'm glad you mentioned the part about putting your name on your testimony. It's also very important to put the bill number that you're testifying on. And always, I mean, you can see on the Capitol website, there are examples of testimony if you want to go to almost any bill. You can see all the testimony that's been submitted, and you can get tips and tricks from some of the experienced lobbyists who are always submitting bills, bolding whether you support or oppose a bill, things like that. I'm going to go quickly because it's 11:43. I'm going to go to a question from an anonymous attendee. I didn't know we could have those. Anyway, this person is basically asking about gut and replace. I don't know that there's an answer to that, but I'm going to give all three of my panelists maybe 30 seconds to address that. Go, Gary.
So I'll jump in. Gut and replace is, generally speaking, you know, a bad thing. You're putting stuff into a bill that has not been heard. There are ways to make it a good thing. So if you're late in the session and a bill is gut and replaced, the Senate or the House need to schedule hearings for it. That's the most important thing, is the public has an opportunity to hear the contents of those bills. And then there's votes on it. Generally speaking, it's a way to circumvent the system, and I don't believe it should be allowed. I think that
So, let me rephrase the question then. I've seen it used in a very bad way. And, you know, as someone who testifies on a bill and participates all the way through, you basically wasted your time. These people who do the gut and replace can completely remove, if the title is general enough, they can remove all of the contents of the bill and make it a completely unrelated bill. What can we as citizens do about that?
well,
To stop that?
elect good people who share your worldview on this.
Okay.
Okay, so if the legislature wanted to, if the issue rises to the level, it's a last minute, it's a hurricane, it's a coronavirus, and there needs to be a bill, the legislature can extend the session for a couple of days or a week or whatever to have the proper hearings. And so the only thing you can do is elect good people and let the people that are there know that this is not an acceptable practice, and they need to give the public the right to participate in the process.
Okay.
In my humble opinion.
Thank you. Now, there was another question that I don't see up here anymore. But first, I want to give Tina a chance to address the gut and replace if you want to, Tina.
So it's as evil as it can be as good. It's a tool. When I craft a bill, I'm super careful to make my bill title super specific so that my bills can't be used as a gut and replace. If the title of your bill is related to agriculture, they can do anything with that thing. So since it has been used for purposes that are good, I get it. Like, it's not a very democratic process. And the fact that you can grab one and push something completely opposite of what the original bill intent was is, you know, kind of scary for the public. And, you know, there's lots of subversion of democracy in our process. The one party chamber has its drawbacks because of that. And the committee chairs and leadership have an awful lot of consolidated power.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to go to the question that I don't see anymore that I thought was a good one. From Mark Dikos was asking, should you spend your time writing letters to the editor or spend more time doing testimony?
I do testimony and repurpose it for a letter to the editor. Do both.
Yeah, you got to do both.
Okay. Simon, do you want to comment on that?
I did, because I typed an answer to Mark Dikos's question, and I pretty much said what Gary just said, is both are really useful. Certainly letters to the editor impact public opinion, which impacts elections. And if a letter to the editor is about the representative or senator's district, then it will influence their vote. And then, yeah, just cut and paste and put that in your testimony to the bill hearing if that's appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I see another question from Mark Sheehan. I don't understand because I think there's a typo. It says, it looks like what groups do gut and replace, but I'm not sure if, and I don't understand that question. Maybe we can come back to that afterwards we won't have our panelists here, our illustrious panelists. But we could put that in the parking lot and put that out after the fact. Maybe you can clarify that question to me, and we'll get that answered for you. So we're going to go to our second break. Thank you again to all of our panelists. I thought that was a great session. And we'll be back at 12 o'clock.
Okay, thanks
Thanks,
for the
Albert.
invitation.
All right,
Aloha.
aloha.